For decades, one photograph sat buried in an old drawer, dismissed as just another chilling reminder of the Second World War. A row of Nazi soldiers standing stiffly behind captured prisoners. At first glance, it was unremarkable compared to the countless other images of brutality from that era. But when experts recently enhanced and analyzed it, the picture revealed something extraordinary. An unsettling detail that not only confirmed the fate of one long-lost resistance fighter, but also raised shocking questions about a Nazi officer who may not have died when history claimed he did. What began as a family heirloom quietly tucked away has now become the center of an international historical investigation. But why does one faded snapshot matter so much today? Because hidden in its shadows lies a clue powerful enough to rewrite history itself. Could a single photograph change everything we know? Why old photos still matter. World War II left behind millions of documents, photographs, and artifacts. For historians, these records are more than relics. They are fragments of human memory. Yet the scale of the war means that not everything was cataloged, and many pieces were hidden, lost, or deliberately destroyed. Even today, private families stumble across forgotten letters, diaries, and pictures that can completely alter our understanding of the past. In recent decades, digital technology has given experts powerful new tools. High-resolution scanners, facial recognition algorithms, and archival databases make it possible to pull extraordinary detail out of seemingly ordinary photographs. What looks like a faded group shot can reveal identities, locations, and connections that were invisible to the naked eye. This is why the discovery of a single photo in the belongings of a quiet German grandfather is so significant. It wasn't just an old image, it became a window into two overlapping mysteries: the disappearance of a Polish resistance nurse and the possible survival of one of the Third Reich's most elusive intelligence officers. Historians often emphasize that photographs have a unique power compared to written documents. Diaries and memoirs can lie, exaggerate, or omit. Official reports can be drafted to please superiors or obscure failures. But a photo, captured in a fleeting moment, often holds truths that no one at the time intended to preserve. That is why wartime photos are so heavily scrutinized today. They freeze not only the subjects but also the unguarded details around them. Bystanders, landscapes, and facial expressions that might speak volumes decades later. In this case, the photograph became the centerpiece of renewed debates about the reliability of memory, the fragility of evidence, and the unfinished business of justice. For years, many had dismissed claims that certain high-ranking Nazis had escaped Europe in the final days of the war. Stories of secret flights to Spain, U-boat journeys to Argentina, or underground rat lines through Italy were often relegated to the realm of conspiracy theory. But when a photograph emerges suggesting that one of those figures might indeed have resurfaced years later, the boundary between myth and possibility shifts. The broader importance of this lies in what such discoveries remind us: that history is not a closed book. Even when we think the story has been told, when the trials have ended and the archives have been studied, surprises can still appear. A soldier's snapshot tucked into a wallet or a civilian's candid photograph at a train station can send researchers down entirely new paths. Each new find doesn't just add detail to the past, it forces us to reassess what we thought we knew and to confront the gaps that remain. Moreover, these revelations highlight how personal memory intersects with collective memory. Families often keep old boxes of photographs without fully realizing what they contain. For them, the images may simply represent a father, grandfather, or uncle in uniform. But when shared with historians, these same images can transform into evidence, linking personal histories with the broader narrative of the war. The photograph in question underscores this dynamic. To the family, it was just part of a collection. To experts, it became a spark for international debate. Old photos also carry emotional weight. They can rehumanize victims who were reduced to statistics, restoring faces to the millions lost. At the same time, they can expose perpetrators who tried to vanish into anonymity. In both cases, they remind us that history is not abstract. It is lived and remembered by individuals. Each photograph that surfaces is another piece of that unfinished puzzle. But what happens when one of these forgotten photographs refuses to stay silent? What if a single image tucked away for decades holds secrets powerful enough to rewrite history itself? The Forgotten Photograph. The story begins with a granddaughter sorting through her late grandfather's possessions in Munich. He had been a reserved man, remembered mainly for his thick glasses, Bavarian accent, and collection of old cameras. To the family, he was simply the quiet patriarch who tinkered with lenses and old film rolls, a man whose silence about the war years seemed more like modesty than secrecy. He rarely spoke about that period, though they knew he had once worked as a journalist in occupied Europe. Weeks after his passing, while carefully cataloging boxes of notebooks and rolls of undeveloped negatives, the granddaughter discovered a small wooden drawer at the back of his writing desk. It was locked, and the brass key lay taped beneath a false bottom in a nearby drawer, as if he had wanted the contents hidden but not permanently lost. Inside, she found a yellowed envelope marked with the single word Draußen. The paper was brittle, its corners darkened with age, as though it had not been touched in decades. Curious, she opened it and slid out a single black and white photograph, curled and fragile, its edges worn smooth by time. The image froze a chilling moment. Several women, their hands bound, standing in front of uniformed Nazi soldiers. Their faces carried a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. Behind them stretched a train platform flanked by dense forest, the kind of remote transit stop often used for deportations. The setting suggested not the bustle of a major city, but the quiet efficiency of small, hidden operations meant to move prisoners without witnesses. On the back of the photograph, faint handwriting identified the location as the Rona transit stop, September 1943. The scrawl was hurried but legible, as though written for memory rather than publication. Among the notes, one name stood out in stark clarity: Lubarsa, possibly pictured far left. The granddaughter froze. The surname rang a bell from her university history courses. Anna Lubarska was the young Warsaw nurse who had become an almost legendary figure in Polish resistance history. Known for smuggling medicine and coded messages into the Warsaw ghetto, she had been rumored to work with underground partisan networks. Her courage was celebrated in oral histories, but her end was a mystery. Anna disappeared without a trace in late 1943. Some accounts claimed she had been executed by a firing squad. Others suggested she fled eastward, vanishing in the chaos as the Nazis retreated. Yet until that moment, no verified photograph of her captivity had ever surfaced. What the granddaughter now held was more than just an image. It was a potential missing piece in a decades-old puzzle. The women in the picture were blurred, their features partially obscured by shadow, but the figure on the left bore a striking resemblance to known portraits of Anna. The high cheekbones, the narrowed eyes, the distinctive braid wrapped around her head. The granddaughter realized she was staring not only at an artifact of her grandfather's hidden past, but also at evidence with the power to reignite one of World War II's enduring mysteries. Why had her grandfather, a supposed journalist with no known Nazi affiliations, been in possession of such a sensitive image? Did he take the photo himself, or had it been passed to him by someone else? And if this was indeed Anna Lubarsa, why had the photograph remained locked away for so many decades? What began as a family task of sorting through a relative's belongings had suddenly become the opening chapter of a much larger historical investigation. But the granddaughter's discovery was only the beginning. What if this single photograph held secrets powerful enough to challenge history itself? Secrets no one had dared uncover until now. Could it? Technology meets history. The granddaughter forwarded the photo to a professor of modern European history at her university. At first, she assumed he might file it away as just another wartime curiosity. Instead, within hours of seeing the image, the professor realized it could be an extraordinary find. He immediately contacted colleagues at the Institute for Wartime Archives, a facility dedicated to preserving fragile materials and re-examining evidence from the Second World War. The photograph was carefully transported to the institute, where it was placed in climate-controlled storage before undergoing a meticulous scanning process. At extremely high resolution, every grain of the film was captured, turning what once seemed like a faded snapshot into a treasure trove of potential clues. Experts then applied state-of-the-art enhancement software. They zoomed in on the suspected figure of Ana Lubarsa, comparing the faint outlines of her face to existing portraits. A tiny scar near the curve of her ear, long invisible to the naked eye, suddenly emerged. Cross-referencing with medical records revealed that Ana had suffered a bicycle accident in 1938, leaving her with a distinctive mark in that exact location. But it was not only the scar that spoke volumes. Around her neck, the enhanced image revealed a delicate chain with a triangular charm. Historians recognized it instantly, the same charm described in personal letters Ana had sent to her sister in Warsaw, where she called it her guardian symbol and vowed never to remove it. Piece by piece, the case for her identification grew overwhelming. For the first time, historians could definitively place Ana Lubarsa in a photograph, bound and under Nazi guard, solving an 80-year-old mystery about her disappearance. The confirmation sent ripples through the academic world. For decades, Anna's fate had lingered between rumor and silence, her name preserved mostly in resistance folklore. Now, here she was, staring back across the decades from a single forgotten photograph. But just as researchers began to close one historical chapter, their attention shifted. They began studying, not the prisoners in the frame, but the background, the men in uniform, the insignia barely visible on collars and cuffs, and the shadowed outlines of faces thought lost to history. And that was where the discovery grew far darker. But what if the real story wasn't about Ana at all? What if hidden in the blurred edges of that photo lay a secret that could rewrite everything we thought we knew? The shocking discovery. While enhancing other parts of the image, a technician noticed something unsettling. One Nazi officer in the background seemed to stand apart from the others. His posture was not that of a weary conscript, but of a man accustomed to authority. Upright, deliberate, almost defiant. His uniform bore insignia that looked slightly irregular, as if modified to distinguish him from the rest. And most disturbing of all, his face carried a faint, unmistakable smirk, a look of control in a scene otherwise defined by fear and brutality. At first, the researchers assumed it was a coincidence, a random resemblance, but to be certain, they ran the image through facial recognition software, cross-referencing it against the vast databases of wartime archives. The results stunned the team, a 97% match with Friedrich Kellermann, an SS intelligence officer who had specialized in psychological operations and propaganda. Kellermann was not an ordinary officer. He had been a close collaborator with Himmler's inner circle, developing methods to manipulate civilian populations in occupied territories. His name surfaced in captured documents detailing mass deportations and psychological experiments designed to break the spirit of resistance fighters. According to official Allied records, however, Kellermann's story had ended in 1945. He was said to have died during the chaotic final days in Leipzig, his supposed suicide documented in reports. Yet, crucially, nobody had ever been recovered. Now the Munich photograph suggested otherwise. Here was Kellermann, alive and well in September 1943, standing in a railway transit stop, not as a man on the run, but as one still firmly in command. If the photograph was authentic, and every test so far indicated it was, then the later accounts of his death might have been fabricated or deliberately falsified. The possibility sent shockwaves through the research team. For decades, rumors had persisted that some high-ranking Nazis had escaped justice, aided by clandestine networks known as the Rat Lines, which funneled fugitives through Italy and Spain to South America. Skeptics often dismissed these claims as myth, but the Kellermann discovery suddenly gave those whispers new credibility. Digging deeper, the team uncovered declassified Interpol files from the 1950s that mention a mysterious figure named Federico Kellmann living in Argentina. The documents noted suspicions that he was a German émigré with ties to former SS officers, but provided no definitive proof. Even more chilling was a 1973 obituary photograph found in a Buenos Aires newspaper. The grainy image showed a man with the same sharp, angular features, piercing eyes, and, most telling of all, the same bent pinky finger Kellermann had injured in youth during a fencing accident. The implications were staggering. If Kellermann had indeed escaped to Argentina, then not only had he evaded accountability for his crimes, but he had also lived an entirely new life under a false identity, blending into the post-war world while his victims' stories remained unfinished. Could one of the SS's most shadowy intelligence officers really have slipped through the cracks of history? And if so, how many others might have done the same? But what if this photograph isn't just evidence? It's a doorway, a link binding heroism and horror, resistance and betrayal. What truths could emerge if both stories collide? What it really means? If true, the photograph bridges two stories that had always seemed separate: the courage of resistance fighters like Anna Lubarsa and the shadowy escape of high-ranking Nazis through the post-war rat lines. On one side is a young nurse who risked her life for others, whose defiance embodied the spirit of ordinary people who refused to submit. On the other is a calculating officer of the SS, a man trained to manipulate minds and dismantle resistance through fear. Their lives intersected in one frozen moment on a railway platform, and that intersection speaks volumes about the unfinished business of World War II. Historians have long debated the reach and sophistication of the Nazi escape networks. After the Reich collapsed in 1945, thousands of officials faced trial at Nuremberg, yet others slipped away with surprising ease. Using forged documents, false names, and the cover of chaos, many traveled south along well-established channels. Some were aided by sympathetic clergy who believed they were helping anti-communist refugees. Others exploited corrupt shipping lines that ferried them from Italian ports to new lives overseas. Argentina, Brazil, and Chile became especially well-known havens, offering protection and, in some cases, quiet admiration for men who had once held power. The most infamous example was Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust. For more than a decade, Eichmann lived quietly in Buenos Aires under the alias Ricardo Clement. Only in 1960 did Israeli intelligence agents finally capture him and bring him to trial in Jerusalem, where the world watched him confronted with his crimes. His case proved once and for all that the escape routes were not a conspiracy but a fact. Against that backdrop, the name Friedrich Kellerman had always circulated in whispers. Occasional rumors suggested he had been seen in Spain or that he had fled to Argentina, but there was never concrete evidence. Many dismissed such talk as folklore, the kind of ghost story that arises when history leaves gaps. But now, this single photograph suggested otherwise. It placed Kellerman alive and active in 1943, and later evidence hinted he could have been among those who slipped through the rat lines and built a new life under an assumed identity. The idea that one of the SS's leading psychological warfare experts could have lived quietly in Argentina for decades raises troubling questions. If he evaded justice so easily, how many others managed the same? And how might their expertise in propaganda, surveillance, or clandestine operations have been repurposed in the Cold War world that followed? Such questions do not only haunt historians, they touch on the moral responsibility of nations that turned a blind eye, whether out of sympathy, ignorance, or convenience. At the same time, the photograph delivers a very different kind of confirmation: the face of Anna Lubarsa. Her identification is more than the solving of a mystery. It is the restoration of dignity to a woman who represented countless other nurses, teachers, students, and workers who risked everything to resist Nazi occupation. For decades, Anna was a name without an ending. Now her presence in that photo is proof that she stood defiantly until the very last, a silent testament to the bravery of resistance fighters whose sacrifices were too often forgotten. In a sense, the photo becomes a symbol of two competing legacies. On one side, the machinery of escape and denial allowed perpetrators to vanish into new lives. On the other hand, the endurance of memory brings forgotten heroes back into the light. Why this matters today? The photograph has since been preserved in the European Holocaust Memorial Archive. Two plaques accompany it, with one honoring Anna Lubarsa as a symbol of resistance, the other naming Friedrich Kellerman not as a tribute, but as evidence of how incomplete justice after the war truly was. For the granddaughter who discovered it, the photo became a complex family legacy. Her grandfather, once a quiet journalist, had preserved evidence of both extraordinary courage and unpunished guilt. Whether he understood the full significance will never be known. For historians, the discovery is a reminder that history is never static. New evidence can surface decades later, reshaping what we think we know. And for the public, it is a sobering lesson. Even the darkest secrets cannot remain hidden forever. What began as a dusty photograph in a locked drawer has become a powerful reminder that history still has secrets to reveal. One image confirmed the fate of a long-lost resistance fighter while exposing the possible survival of a Nazi officer who should never have escaped justice. 80 years later, the photo proves that the past is not as far behind us as we like to think, and that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. So what is your take on this? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.